Hey, welcome to Modern Day Hysteria. Very excited to have you here for this long anticipated debate. I've been excited for this because not only do we have two well-read speakers, but we also have a topic that I think is fairly rare because we've talked about evolution and creation a lot, but we've never talked about the flood of Noah. So with me tonight, I have both Dr. Kent Hovind from Creation Science Evangelism, as well as Jackson Wheat. Now, both of them have successful YouTube channels, and I'm very excited to hand off the mic, so to speak, in a moment to let them introduce themselves and to talk about what they're doing on their channels. And first, I'm just going to do a very brief run through of what to expect tonight, just so you know the format. It will be a formal debate tonight, so it will be a completely even playing field. Nobody can deny that. It's a 10-minute opening from each side, starting with Dr. Hovind, followed by an 8-minute rebuttal from Dr. Hovind and then Jackson Wheat, and then 5-minute closings, and then 14 minutes of Q&A. So with that, taking the affirmative, and since he'll be going first, we'll have Dr. Hovind introduce himself and just discuss what he's doing over at his channel. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. It's good to be with you. My name is Kent Hovind. I taught high school science and math for 15 years. I moved to Pensacola, Florida in January of 1989, and soon thereafter began the ministry called Creation Science Evangelism. I defend the position that the Bible is literally true as written. It is scientifically accurate. The earth is about 6,000 years old. It is not millions of years old. It was destroyed completely by a flood in the days of Noah about 4,400 years ago, or maybe 1,700 years after the creation. That's what the Bible dates that up to. There are now about 330 flood legends that have been discovered.
Oh, I think I'm really sorry about that. Meant to do just a quick introduction of what you're doing over at your organization, as well as just your YouTube channel. So really sorry about that. I maybe didn't make that clear enough. So just going to have that from both speakers, and then we'll start with the introduction. So if you want to quick mention first, Dr. Hovind, we're excited to have you here and would love to hear about what you guys are doing at Creation Science Evangelism, as well as on your YouTube channel.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Yeah. So as well, Jackson Wheat, glad to have you here tonight. And so if you want to share what you're doing over at your YouTube channel.
A whole lot of nothing at the moment. Got school and work, and so unfortunately I've been very quiet on my YouTube channel recently, but I'm hoping to finish up on my long-awaited dinosaur phylogeny series. But we'll see how that goes.
And that's mostly a biology type channel, right?
Yeah, I really just do primarily evolutionary biology, things like that. A little bit of creationist kind of stuff, looking at what they argue, things like that. But mostly it's just the evolutionary biology side of it.
Awesome. Well, we're glad to have you here, and this is going to be a very fun debate. So we are going to get started with the introductions. And so, as mentioned, we're going to have 10 minutes from each speaker, and we'll start with Dr. Hovind, who's taking the affirmative on Noah's flood tonight. So, Dr. Hovind, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, sir. As I said, it's an honor to be with you. My name is Kent Hovind. I taught high school science and math for 15 years. I taught algebra, geometry, trig, and biology, earth science, and physical science. And I moved to Pensacola, Florida in January of '89 so my wife could finish her music degree. And soon thereafter, an article came out in the paper that said dinosaur bones are found in Montana from 80 million years ago. And so I wrote my first ever letter to the editor and said, no, these dinosaur bones are from one that drowned in the flood in the days of Noah. See, fossils don't form today in any significant numbers, or maybe even not at all. Animals have to be buried rapidly in order to fossilize. Literally millions and possibly billions of fully articulated skeletons of animals are found, like the Karoo Formation has 800 million just in one formation in Africa. So today fossils just simply don't form. Animals die and they get scattered around by the coyotes or the buzzards, and so the very existence of fossils is a powerful indication there was a rapid burial. Fossilized footprints are found all over the place. There are several, I think over 1,000 now, Dinosaur trackways have been found where they're leaving their footprints behind in the mud. The mud then gets preserved in the form of a solid rock footprint. So I defend the position that the Bible is literally true, just like it's written, and scientifically accurate. God made everything in 6 days. I don't know of any other way it would work. There are so many millions of what are called symbiotic relationships where certain animals require certain plants or they can't survive, or certain plants require certain animals to pollinate them or spread their seeds or whatever. So the only logical, rational explanation for all the complexity we see in biology is a rapid, instantaneous, relatively instantaneous, few days creation. The Bible says the plants are made on day 3, the sun is made on day 4, and the animals to pollinate the plants are made on day 5 and 6. I don't see how an evolutionist can explain, pollination, etc. So when I was 16 years old, I was raised in East Peoria, Illinois, graduated East Peoria High School in 1971. But I was many different churches, Lutheran, Methodist, Mennonite, all sorts of things, and did not believe the Bible. When I was 16, I gave my heart to the Lord and got saved, became a child of God, got born again, and started riding a church bus to a little Bethel Baptist church in Pekin, Illinois, and began really studying the Bible in earnest. And I realized what I was being taught in school, especially in my biology class that year, and what I was reading in the Bible were in conflict. I said, somebody is seriously wrong, and I'm going to try to find out who it is. So it became a lifetime passion of mine. Would that be almost 50 years ago now, that I said, I've come to the very studied conclusion that the Bible is literally accurate, just like it's written. The only way you can explain so many things we see is with instantaneous or relatively rapid creation. Like I said, the symbiotic relationships, etc. And then the flood in the days of Noah completely destroyed the world. There have now been 330 flood legends found around the world where different cultures are talking about a worldwide flood. And there are those who try to say it was just a local flood. I say, guys, if it's a local flood, why would God tell Noah to build a boat? Tell him to move. It'd be a lot of work to build a boat to get away from a local flood. That'd be ridiculous. Why would he tell him to take 2 of each kind of animal on board? So I defend the position that the Bible is true. The Bible says in the last days there would be scoffers who would be willingly ignorant of the creation and the flood and the coming judgment. If you look in your Bible in the book of 2 Peter, which is almost at the end, 2 Peter chapter, there we go. Can you get my slides up there? Okay. The Bible dates add up to about 6,000 years ago for the creation, and then the flood was about 4,400 years ago. And the Bible says the scoffers are ignorant of those things, the creation and the flood and the coming judgment. I now live in Lenox, Alabama, straight north of Pensacola, about 70 miles, where we're building Dinosaur Adventureland. We opened in April, and we've had visitors come from all over the world. Everything has a science lesson and a Bible lesson. It is lots and lots of fun. Someone gave us the property. In Colossians, the Bible says by him, that would be Jesus Christ, were all things created in heaven, whether they be in earth, whether visible or invisible. All things were created by him and for him. And Jesus said in Matthew 19:4, have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? Jesus is pretty clearly telling us that the beginning was when God made Adam and Eve. We see it in Mark 10:6 again. From the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. And the Bible says by one man, sin entered into the world, and death by sin. In 1 Corinthians 15, it says, by man came death. The question is very, very simple. Why do we have death and suffering on planet Earth? To the evolutionist, death and suffering is a wonderful thing because that's how we get ahead. One animal evolves a little better than the rest for some reason, even though that's never been observed. One animal gets a little better, and then the rest of them have to die in order for this to work. If they don't die off, then the new improved genes are bled back into the population and disappear. So in the Bible viewpoint, death is an enemy. It's a result of man's disobedience, whereas in the evolution viewpoint, death is the hero. That's how we get ahead. Everything else has to die. And the Bible clearly says Adam was the first man, 1 Corinthians 15, and Adam was 130 years old when he had a son named Seth. And Seth was 105 when he begat Enos. So as a young Christian at age 16, I started reading my Bible and I came across these enormous numbers. I said, what is this? Adam is 130 when he becomes a father. And then it says he lives 800 years after that. According to the Bible, the people before the flood lived over 900 years. So something was different. Then along came the big flood. If you add up the dates in the Bible, the flood was about 1656 years after the creation. And it's interesting, the oldest, which would be about 4,400 years ago, the oldest historical records we have on the planet are less than 4,400 years old. There is some controversy about the Egyptian calendar going back beyond that, but Corville did great research on that in the 50s and said, look, the Egyptians greatly exaggerated. Well, obviously they built big pyramids to put their kings in, so they greatly exaggerated a lot of things, and it's, I think, long been disproven. There's a book on our website called website is drdino.com, D-R-D-I-N-O. The book is called The Evolution Handbook. And on page 48 in there's a whole section about the Egyptian calendar. If somebody wants to try to trust that, they're sadly mistaken. Several kings were kings simultaneously, pharaohs were, and they ended up in sequential or consecutive order. But the Bible dates would indicate that it was a creation about 6,000 years ago and a flood 4,400 years ago. That flood's the only way I'm aware of that we can explain so many things that we see. I was in like all the fossils, for instance. Fossils simply do not form. How many millions of animals got killed today around the world, and how many fossilized? Well, many millions died. I'm not aware of any fossilizing. I think everybody agrees that in order for an animal to fossilize, it has to be rapidly buried before it has time to decompose and the scavengers drag it all over the woods. But we find fully articulated skeletons by the billions. All the bones in order. They had to be buried alive to accomplish this, or soon after they died had to be buried and protected from scavengers and decay, etc. So, but the Bible tells us in 2 Peter chapter 3 that the scoffers in the last days would be ignorant, willingly ignorant of the flood. They don't want to admit there was a flood because that flood clearly indicates there was a judgment of God on this planet. So I defend the position the Bible is true. There was a flood that destroyed the world. That flood explains all the features like Grand Canyon. The top of Grand Canyon is 7,000 to 8,000 feet above sea level, the Kaibab Plateau. Where the river starts cutting the canyon in Page, Arizona, it's less than 3,000 feet above sea level. Well, rivers don't flow uphill. Grand Canyon is actually a washed out spillway from a huge dam. If you dammed up Grand Canyon today, it would take a lot of dirt, but it would back up and cover half of Colorado and Utah. A giant lake would back up, and I cover that on my video number 6. So once it got over the top of that dam, my guess would be 50 years after Noah's flood, the lake got too deep and went over the top and washed out Grand Canyon probably in a couple weeks. Certainly not millions of years. We built a dam here at Dinosaur Adventureland in Lenox, Alabama. Just Google dam break at Dinosaur Adventureland. It was almost 2 years ago now, Christmas Eve. We had built a small dam to hold the water while we fixed the big one that had broken. And we cut a notch in it, let it erode. It's incredible how washed the whole dam out in 7 minutes. And the only way to explain features like Grand Canyon or El Paso, Texas, or thousands of other places around the world where it's obviously a rapid erosion, dam break. So my position is the Bible is true on the creation. It's true about the flood, and it's true about the coming judgment. You guys are going to face God one day. You might want to get ready for that. He's got a record of everything. Everything. All right, over to you.
Awesome. All right. So Dr. Hovind is finishing with 40 seconds extra left over, and we are going to switch it over now to Jackson Wheat. So Jackson Wheat, I'm just going to reset the timer, and when you are ready,
I get my 10
go
minutes.
ahead.
I get 10 minutes.
That's right.
Alrighty. Well, here we go. Okay. So I'd like to say, first of all, hello, everyone, and thank you, Modern Day Hysteria, for having me on. The question asked is, did the flood of Noah happen? The answer from biology, paleontology, and geology is a resounding no. Before we get into the actual data, I need to point out that analogies are entirely unhelpful in this arena. By definition, analogies obfuscate the issue, so the best way to be closest to the data is to avoid analogies altogether. So, First, we can look at the genetic variation among members of a species and use that to trace the members back to their most recent common ancestor. This has been done for humans using mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosomal DNA, tracking both the most recent common female and male ancestor, respectively, of modern humans to over 100,000 years ago. And using mitochondrial DNA haplogroups, the ancestry of all humans ties back to Africa over 70,000 years ago. There is no evidence from any peer-reviewed genetic studies that the human population and all other animals dropped to just 8 members or a pair or so approximately 4,000 years ago, and no creationist has shown that they had. No recent population bottlenecks among all animals, no global flood. Therefore, from a biological perspective, the global flood notion is already destroyed, and things get even worse when you add paleontology. For starters, the entire concept of index fossils would be non-existent if a global flood happened. Those are organisms that have a short vertical range but are global in distribution. Diatoms, for example. I did a whole video about these. What's interesting is that you only see certain strata around the world, but not in others. For example, the conodont species, Mycicella postthernsteini, is only present in the earliest strata of the Rhaetian age of the Triassic period. The same goes for paleomorphs, pollen grains and spores, things like that, and oxygen isotope levels, all of which reveal their paleoclimates and water temperatures. They would have verified a flood if it had happened, but they don't. Finally, we can look to the taphonomy of various fossils to get an understanding of the environment in which they died. This is where the idea that a fossil only tells you something died, as Holman likes to say, really falls apart. This entire field of study can differentiate organisms that died in terrestrial environments, such as being buried by a sand dune, from those who died in watery graves. There are many deposits with these distinctive dune strata, ones which look very different from deposits laid down in water. And then there's interbedded airborne volcanic ash. That's another thing like creationists like Andrew Snelling know about but cannot explain. Kent Hovind, meanwhile, doesn't even try. But even those animals that do die in watery graves don't fit the cataclysmic flood model. For instance, the Eocene mesopit fossils from Germany show the local animals died quickly in an anoxic lake, sank to the bottom, and were buried in the sediment. How could a super flood have avoided sloshing in a much broader range of animals, including the tiny index fossils that, according to the creationist model, were all alive at the same time? And how come none of them are preserved with enough carbon in all of them to about 4,400 years ago? They don't, because that's not what happened. But we're not done yet. The final argument against a global flood comes from geology. Creationists imagine that the flood explains most, if not all, fossil-bearing geologic formations on Earth. However, they only apply that to a few poster child cases, such as the Grand Canyon or marine fossils on Mount Everest. Let's take the Grand Canyon. Even creationists have had to evolve on this, realizing a single flood event couldn't lay down the rock layers and carve the canyon in it. Since Hovind's time, creationists like Andrew Snelling have had to attribute the canyon rock to the flood, which somehow turned into rock so fast that they could then be carved into the canyon by a second post-flood flood. But the rocks don't support this. Limestone alone is a problem for flood geology. No creationist has come up with a viable model for how limestone, which is built from the calcium carbonate skeletons of corals, foraminifera, and mollusks, could rapidly form in even just a few thousand years, let alone only a few years during the flood. Worse, hydrodynamics shows that floods on their own don't carve out curving incised trenches like the Grand Canyon. Massive flood events like the ones that scoured the scablands of Washington state gouge out vertical walled canyons and leave massive deposition ripples, not at all like what we see in Arizona. Hovind's flood model doesn't even match that of other major creationist organizations, such as Ancestor, who neither rely on nor want anything to do with Hovind. For starters, Hovind claimed in a 2014 lecture his apparent ability to fit his house to his neighbors. However, Andrew Snelling acknowledges that Pangaea did exist, albeit briefly, and that the supercontinent Rodinia was the pre-flood world. Hovind also believes paleomagnetic reversals don't exist, which is again contradicted by both other creationist organizations and scientific technical literature. Hovind's only argument against the reversals in his 2014 lecture was a quote mine of a 1979 paper that he obviously didn't read, since the paper itself doesn't dispute the existence of the reversals. Hovind also evidently didn't bother to check any of the technical literature on the reversals written in the almost 40 years since that paper was published, which is indicative of his scholarship. Before creationists try using the global flood to explain formations hundreds or thousands of miles away, maybe they should try explaining what's in their own backyards first. For example, Hovind lives in Lenox, Alabama. That area is Mesozoic strata extending from 140 million years ago to the present. Fish fossils have been found in the very county Hovind lives, dating to the Eocene, around the same time as those Mesolake critters, indicating that the area was a Cenozoic strata with the youngest rock near the coast. Not only does a global flood fail to explain the distribution of fossils in either of our localities, creationists like Kent Hovind haven't even thought to try. There is no model, period, for how the global flood caused anything, let alone caused nearly everything. But I have more to add. Hovind believes that there was believes in the what is called the Canopy Theory, even though it's not even a hypothesis because it hasn't been tested, which is wholly rejected by both Answers in Genesis and Creation. Hovind believes that the woolly mammoths of Siberia, at least some of them, were flash frozen, which again is contradicted by other creationists. And Hovind even said in his 2014 lecture that mammoths weren't designed for cold weather, citing that some animals in warm places have long fur. I mean, I was flabbergasted by that claim, honestly. If you have to look not only at the amount of fur that they have, you have to look at how much it's packed onto their body, how much, what percentage of their body is fat. You have to look at their diet. For instance, we know that there's technical literature on the mammoth diet, which shows that they ate Arctic plants because you can find the spores in their dung and in their teeth from Arctic plants. So we know that they were eating these things. We know that they were Arctic critters. This isn't even, I don't even know how that's a debate. He said fossils today aren't forming in significant numbers. I'd like to see some literature on that. I'd like to know his taphonomic analysis of organisms dying today versus organisms that died in the past, and how we can know that they're not fossilizing today. I'm not really sure how he determined that. He mentioned the Kuru Basin, which is actually very interesting because it has synapsids, which are the mammal-like reptiles, which is the informal name for them, and they are in the lower strata. And as you go up, you find more advanced mammaliforms like Megazostrodon. And so I encourage Hovind and also all other creationists to explain the rep, because they don't. And he also mentioned symbiotic relationships, but symbiotic relationships are pretty easily explained by evolution. I mean, for example, pollen in bees. I did a video on that. Plants or angiosperms dispersed via wind, via animals before bees came into the picture. Bees and other hymenopterans, and then once hymenopterans did evolve, which actually we have very good transitional fossils for, which were predicted under evolutionary theory, such as Ficamyrma. I encourage all of you to look it up.
Get a 1 minute warning.
Okay. Good. Okay. And the other thing you said was there are no languages dating. Did you say predating about 4,000 years ago? I think is what you said. I just looked it up online. The Chinese have ideographic symbols dating to about 6,000 years ago. So there's that. All in all, I also really didn't hear much of a defense of the existence of the flood from Hovind's side. Just really kind of explaining what the Bible says on it, which isn't an argument. So anyways, I'll end.
Okay, so we are now going to switch into the rebuttal phase. So we are going to give each speaker a total of 8 minutes to give their case or rebuttal. So we're going to turn it over to Dr. Kent Hovind. And Dr. Kent Hovind, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, sir. Yeah, boy, Baxton, you made up all kinds of. One of the things that concerned me when this started happening with the torn up. What's the word? I have been sick all day and vomiting and don't have quite a straight answer to all this stuff. But we feel like it's perfectly fine to stop the fighting over this because it's so simple. Nobody ever sees nothing turn into something. And so we would like to see how on earth this happened. How did we get resulted to just one brief stick with Nelson handling the case? I think it's obvious that there was a creation of everything. God created everything in 6 days. And there was a flood 4,400 years ago that completely destroyed everything. And the animals calmed down to a few of each kind when Noah's flood came. I think that all the biology is best answered by an instantaneous creation of all the creatures. There's so many millions of symbiotic relationships where certain plants require certain animals, etc. And then they were destroyed at the flood in the days of Noah and survived with God telling Noah to save 2 of each kind on land in whose nostrils was the breath of life. The fish in the water did fine. They were not required to do anything for the fish in the water. So I guess I'm confused how a person such as Jackson would explain the origin of these things, how they would explain the features, like the top of Grand Canyon is 8,000 feet above sea level. The river starts cutting the canyon at less than 3,000 feet. Water doesn't flow uphill. Grand Canyon had to be formed when a massive lake failed. If you closed in Grand Canyon right now, just fill it in with dirt, a huge lake would back up covering half of Colorado, Utah, South Dakota. And it would, once it goes over the top of the Kaibab Plateau, it would wash out what's now Grand Canyon in a matter of a few days or a few weeks at the most. It would not take millions of years. So how do you get a river, Colorado River, cut across a plateau, 277 miles, that is higher than where it starts cutting the river, starts cutting the canyon? All of the things I see, and I taught earth science for 15 years, all things I see from earth science tell us there was a worldwide flood. El Paso, Texas is called El Paso because it's on the pass. If you plugged up the gap between the mountains at El Paso, Texas, a huge lake would back up covering part of New Mexico and Texas. So I think Peter was right. In the last days, he said scoffers would be willingly ignorant of the creation and the flood. You mentioned, Jackson, about some fossils are ash, and Hovind doesn't address this. I have some in my museum, some fossils in ash. During Noah's flood, the fountains of the deep would be broken up, like the Bible says. There'd be volcanoes going off all over the world, ash and lava, as well as sedimentary rock containing literally millions or billions of fossils. We have a huge fossil collection in our dinosaur ventureland in Lenox, Alabama. Come on down, indicating rapid burial. Fossils are often found with like fossil fish, with their gills extended, indicating they died searching for oxygen, trying to suck oxygen out of the water. And I cover all that on video number 6 of my seminar series. Go to drdino.com, D-R-D-I-N-O, and you can watch all my videos right online. Just go to Kent Hovind and Google that name. So you covered so many things, Jackson. I'm not going to have time. It's a little unfair for you to bring up so many topics, and I don't have time to cover them all. But I think I cover all of them in my video series, Kent Hovind, or drdino.com. Watch my seminar series, which is 18 hours long of me talking rapidly. As far as paleomagnetic reversals, I'd like you to explain how the magnetic field of the Earth that is spinning 1,040 miles an hour at the equator, how can that magnetic field reverse? I know that they need it to reverse because we've seen a steady decline. Since the magnetic field's been measured, they've seen it decline. They know it would decline and disappear, I think 50 or 80,000 years or something like that. Many people have done research on that. So you guys need to say it reverses, but there's no physical evidence. They see stronger and weaker magnetism in the mid-Atlantic ridge, and I cover all that on video number 1, called The Age of the Earth, on my video series. They can see that on drdino.com. As far as Pangea, all the continents fitting together, that is pure baloney. People say, were the continents ever connected? Well, they're connected right now. It's just the low places are full of water. I mean, there's a bottom to the oceans, you know. So the Pangea theory, I think, is really dumb, and earth science is one of the many sciences I taught. As far as paleomagnetic reversals, I would challenge you to show me an actual reversal, not stronger, weaker magnetism. Go to the book, go to the creation.com website by Walt Brown, PhD in physics, who taught at the Air Force Academy. There's a long section on that. So let's see. You're right, though, that some other creation ministries disagree with me. I think that's fine. They're wrong. I'm right. It's not too complicated. As far as a symbiotic relationship, I'd like to see how you explain that. And transitional fossils, I'm not aware of any. No farmer has ever seen a cow produce a non-cow or a dog produce a non-dog or corn produce non-corn. If you wish to believe, capital B, believe, that this happened long ago and far away, well, then that's your religious belief. That's not science. So evolution is not science. It's got nothing to do with science. It's a religion that people believe in very strongly. And Jackson carefully had to read all of his stuff. He couldn't talk about it off the top of his head. But, I'd love to go through that with a fine-tooth comb with you, Jackson, if you really are interested. Maybe you like the apparent potential freedom from God for something else in your life. I don't know. You'd have to answer him. Chinese calendar going back 6,000 years. Chinese go back. Well, I covered that on video number 2, and I'm out of time here. But no, they don't go back 6,000 years. They go back 4,300, I believe, for the Chinese calendar to a guy named Yu, Y-U, who they say escaped a great flood with his wife, 3 children, and 3 sons, and the sons' wives. Total of 8 people on the ark. That's what they say in the Chinese legend. I covered that on DVD number 2, which you can watch on Kent Hovind, on my website, drdino.com. Okay, I did not get them all. As far as mammoths being cold weather, I think you're mistaken. They don't have sebaceous glands. Their hair would pack together and they would mat. They have to have oil on the hair to stop that from packing together and matting in cold weather. So you need to watch my video number 6 carefully to get corrected on what happened to the mammoths. They were a warm weather animal. Thank you.
All right, and Dr. Hovind finishes with a minute left, and we will now switch over. So this is going to be the rebuttal phase from Jackson Wheat. So Jackson Wheat, I am resetting the clock for 8 minutes, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Alrighty, so you bring up that the Colorado enters the Grand Canyon higher than the top of the Grand Canyon. Well, that's because of erosion. That's not because of a giant flood. That's because of a long, slow erosion, which has actually been documented in the technical literature. That's not really a mystery to anyone. It's pretty easy to look up. You mentioned the interbedded airborne volcanic ash. So how is it laid down in water if it's airborne ash while it was underwater? I don't really understand how that worked. In addition to that, I don't really understand how it could have been laid down between different strata if I don't understand how the strata were forming. You need to provide a model for how lithification occurs over the span of a few days or at most a few years, which no creationist has. I've never seen a model of lithification occurring in days or years, or just a few years, I should say. So good luck on that one. And when you work that one out, I encourage you to publish in the technical literature, send it over to Nature or PNAS, someone like that, and they'll review it for you. So good luck. You say that the magnetic pole, or sorry, the rocks of the Paleomagnetic Reversal are just stronger or weaker. I would like to see a citation of that. They are actually flipped. The iron in them is flipped. They're pointing in the opposite direction. That's why they're called Paleomagnetic Reversals. Again, I mean, Andrew Snelling is a geologist, and he is a creationist, but he at least acknowledges that these are reversals. He says that they occurred, the reversals occurred very quickly, but they're still reversals. That's not really up for debate among pretty much anyone else. We understand that the continents fit together a number of times in the past, not just Pangea, but also Rodinia and Penotia and Columbia Valbara. There were a whole bunch of different supercontinents that have formed. We can tell this because of the geochemistry of different strata across the continents. We can also see the way that the continents are moving today, and we also understand that there's the there's subduction going on under the crust, going on in the mantle. So the rock is getting recycled and comes up with the boundaries, and then the continent's moving away. That's again something that's not really debated, I don't think, at least not among researchers anymore, and hasn't been for a long time. So there's geochemistry. This is the subduction model makes specific predictions. It's very well tested. You said, again, brought up the symbiotic relationships. I mean, like I said, there were angiosperms first. We can see that, and then we can see that there were hymenopterans following. When you said you've never seen a transitional fossil, what's transitional about Sphaecomyrma, for instance, is it has features of both wasps and bees, because bees, which are I forget off the top of my head, but bees are a subset of wasps. So are ants. Both of these are subsets of wasps. Bees just essentially became herbivores, and ants became flightless, essentially. And I did a whole video on that. There's a load of technical literature on the phylogeny of ants and also of bees and also of wasps. And so in this case, it's evolution made a prediction that was verified, because researchers were looking in Miocene strata at bees and ants, or well, specifically in this case, it was at bees, and they predicted that the ancestor of bees should be in the Cretaceous. And surely enough, it was. You said, and that was a long time ago when they first found Sphaecomyrma. You said a cow has never produced a non-cow. I am willing to agree with you on that. Never will. In the same way that a vertebrate will never produce a non-vertebrate, eukaryote will never produce a non-eukaryote. These are clades. Once you get into how many ancestors do you have to go before you escape or how many descendants do you have to go before you escape your ancestry? It doesn't even make sense. Snakes are still tetrapods, even though they don't have their limbs, because they still have the genes for limbs, and they still have the patterning homeobox genes. They also have ancestors who did have legs, like Pachyrhacus, Eupodopus, Tetrapodopus. That's another one. And you can see they have boids, which are one of the basal clades, have little limb buds. The same is true of toothless mammals like aardvarks, anteaters, all the group that was formerly known as the dentates. Most of them are Xenarthra now. Even though they don't have teeth, they still have the genes for teeth and the genes for enamel. Same with baleen whales. Same with chickens, because chickens are theropods. A transitional fossil, by definition, is a fossil that has characteristics diagnostic of both its ancestral and its descendant clade. Tiktaalik's a very good example of this. It has the fins of fish. It has scales of fish, but it also has the lungs of a tetrapod. Has a head like a tetrapod. Its wrist intermediate between both fish and tetrapods. Again, you can fact check everything I say. Just go to the technical literature, look it up. Neil Shubin did a whole write up on that, and other researchers have looked at Tiktaalik in the years hence. And there are, by the way, a bunch of for the audience, there are a bunch of links for the first talk that I just read off the paper, which will be in the description. I looked up the thing about sebaceous glands. If that's your only line of evidence, I mean, that's pretty weak. But it seems that no ambiguous answer has been found to the question if mammoths had skin sebaceous glands. Theoretically, the living conditions of the woolly mammoth at high latitudes did not exclude substantial evolutional differences from elephants. It is known that elephants have no sebaceous glands, and the only facial glands of elephants have been described as modified sweat glands actively working during the reproduction period. Here we present documentary proof of the presence of sebaceous glands in the woolly mammoth, Mammothus primigenius. So there is proof now of sebaceous glands in woolly mammoths. So I think you might need to revise that one and take a look at the technical literature on it. Again, like I said, it's so hard to even fathom the idea that mammoths weren't adapted for cold environment. They have all the markers of a cold living critter. There are also woolly rhinos who lived in the Arctic. There's just so much data on this. I'm just flabbergasted by some of the things that you seem to reject. But anyways, that's pretty much everything I got, and I got about 40 seconds left, so I'll just donate it, I guess. So there you go.
Jackson Wheat finishing up early with 40 seconds left indeed. And we will now move into the closing statements. So just want to remind you, if you are new here, we have debates every week. We'd love to have you back. Hit that subscribe button for notifications of future debates. And now we are moving into the closing statement. So Dr. Kent Hovind, you will have 5 minutes, and then we will switch over to Jackson Wheat, who will also have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you for having me. Yes, I do believe the Bible is literally true and scientifically accurate. The Bible teaches that God made everything in 6 days. That's the only way it would work. I can't imagine things slowly coming at bit piece by piece because so many animals and plants depend upon each other, not only for reciprocation of the gases, CO2 and oxygen, but for food supply and pollination of distribution of seeds and lots of different things like that. So the Bible has never been proven wrong on that point. I'm not sure how you could prove it right. But the evolution theory that these things develop gradually by chance, random, just happened, I think is ludicrous. We never see that happen. No one ever sees a dog produce a non-dog or a cow produce a non-cow. And his answer that, yes, that basically going forward, they will always produce the same kind. Cows, he said, will never produce a non-cow. But ultimately, Jackson, you have to believe that cows came from a non-cow somewhere long ago and far away. You have to believe that. And you're welcome to believe whatever you want, but I wish you guys would admit evolution is a religious belief. It's not science. Nobody's ever seen a cow produce a non-cow, but you have to believe that a cow came from a rock 4.6 billion years ago. And I'm not just oversimplifying the theory. I'm trying to point out the key points so that you can see how dumb it is. They say nothing exploded and made everything. That's ridiculous. And then a batch of dust cooled down and condensed and made Earth's surface with a hard, rocky crust on it. Then it rained on those rocks for millions of years and turned them into soup, and the soup came alive. This stuff is never seen. Never. It's pure hypothetical. I think it's pure baloney. And then this first life form found somebody to marry and something to eat, both pretty amazing miracles, and slowly developed into everything we see today. And you guys are welcome to believe that, but that's not science. It's a religious belief. Evolution is a religion in every sense of the word. They believe in it in spite of the complete lack of evidence. We never see it happen today. They can't even make it happen in the laboratory. They've been trying for hundreds, maybe thousands of generations of bacteria or fruit flies or things that have a shorter generation period, trying to get them to do something along the lines of evolve into something else. So far, zero, nada, no evidence whatsoever of any plant or animal ever becoming something other than the same kind. What everybody would recognize, what a 5-year-old would recognize as the same kind of plant or animal. So I do admire your faith if you want to believe dogs and pine trees are related. I do not admire your science, and I feel bad that somebody taught you that. I feel worse that you believed it, that pine trees and dogs are related. Okay, I know they both bark. That's a joke. But so, yes, I think if you'd watch my seminar series, drdino.com, we answer nearly all of these questions. And you can always call me, 855-BIG-DINO, extension 3. That's my personal phone. I take calls all day long, 100 of them, and we'll be glad to help. Bigger question, though, Jackson, what if you're wrong? I mean, this is Pascal's wager, obviously. What if you're wrong? What have you lost? If you're wrong and you haven't trusted God as your Savior or Jesus Christ, you're going to hell. What happens if I'm wrong? I don't see anything happening. If your theory is true, I'm going to the grave like everybody else, and I've lived a wonderful life. Christianity, even if it's not true, is better for society and makes you a better husband, better dad. I think it's better in every possible way. But in addition to the fact that you're going to die one day, and if it's true, you're really going to be glad you trusted Jesus Christ and his blood shed on that cross to pay for your sins. I would assume you've done things wrong. You've sinned. You've broken God's laws, just the 10 commandments. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, honor your father and mother, etc. If you've broken that, what happens? Is anything going to happen to Adolf Hitler? Is there a judgment someplace? Or in your theology, it's just over? He succeeded. Stalin lived to be an old man, 78, I think. and died. Killed probably 60 million people. Is that it? Nothing happens to him? Is that what you believe? Anyway, yes, I'd like to get Q&A from the audience here, and this is fun. And Jackson, I'd come down to Dinosaur Ritual, and I'll give you a tour, answer any questions you've got. Come see our museum. It's pretty amazing. Over
Excellent. Oh, did you have more? Sorry.
No, over to you.
Awesome. All right. So Dr. Hovind wraps up with 20 seconds remaining, and we will now switch it over to Jackson Wheat. So this is Jackson Wheat's 5-minute closing statement. And Jackson, when you are ready, the floor is yours.
Okay. Yes, I do recognize I did present a lot of data in this, and you couldn't respond to all of it. And I'm sorry that happens. That's the nature of the debate. But even the points that we did kind of have back and forths on, there was really no answer, or the answer you presented was not correct, or not cited, or is not sourced in the data, some things like that. And in this case, there were almost no arguments for the flood, really, in the closing statements. Maybe they weren't supposed to be, but I really didn't hear any. Abiogenesis, you brought that up. You've said water rained on the rocks for millions of years. No, it's not what abiogenesis is. Abiogenesis also has nothing to do with evolution by definition, since evolution is change in allele frequencies in a population over generations. Abiogenesis is the origin of life. So if you have no alleles, no reproduction, no generations going on, you have no evolution by definition. So there's actually, if you ever do want to talk about abiogenesis, I'm happy to do so. There's a whole lot we don't know. I'll get that right up front. But what there is very interesting and almost entirely ignored by creationists. I know because I've read the literature along with R.J. Downard. You mentioned, you said, yes, going one way, it's always going to be cows, but at some point there would be an origin of cows. And yes, I agree. Cows are artiodactyls, or set artiodactyls. They are, which means they're even-hooved mammals. Cows are related to giraffes and whales and hippos, all the other members of set artiodactyl, which is an order. Then Laurasia all these members are connected to each other by a number of different lines of genetic data, genetic and morphological data. And so there's quite a good reason. There's quite a lot of literature indicating that cows had an origin among a clade of mammals, and then you can trace that back and line which until it aligns with all the other mammals, because there's a whole lot of data indicating that also. Same with amniotes, same with tetrapods. You can just keep going back. There's loads and loads of data. Don't take my word for it. Go Google Scholar. Heck, just go to Wikipedia and look at the sources that they use. And then you mentioned, and I'll end on this, you mentioned Pascal's wager. What if you're wrong about the flying spaghetti monster, who makes anyone who brings up arguments about the global flood tortured forever? There you go. What if that happens? See, since I didn't argue for the global flood, I won't be tortured forever. So there you go. And that's really just about it. So I'll hand it over to you. Maybe we can donate this time to Q&A or something. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Totally appreciate it, Jackson Wheat. So Jackson Wheat ends early as well, and we will now move into the Q&A. So very excited for this. I'm going to set the timer. So we're set to go. And I know that the first question actually was for Dr. Hovind, and that was, and a member of the audience asked, what if you were wrong and it was Allah who is actually the one true God?
Well, I think by my definition, God would have to be flawless and perfect and make no mistakes. And the book that the Muslims follow, the Quran, teaches all sorts of silly things that are obviously non-scientific. Like if a husband and wife have sex and he reaches the climax first, it'll be a boy, and she reaches the climax first, it'll be a girl. Or the sun goes down at night and sets in a pond of murky water. There are hundreds of obvious scientific errors in that book. It's not scientifically accurate. So I am not at all scared that it's going to turn out to be Allah. I have a Bible that I've read many, many times for 50 years now, and would be glad to debate that if you would like. But I'm unaware of any scientific or mathematical or otherwise errors in that book. It is flawless. no mistakes whatsoever. So I'd say the chance of Allah being the true God is absolutely zero. No chance of that at all. Muhammad was an illiterate person in the Middle East in 600, and he had visions from going into trances. There are many, many books been written on that. Why I'm Not a Muslim is an example of one you can get from the Bible Baptist bookstore. So yeah, people can believe whatever they want. Obviously, you can believe anything, but no, I'd say there was zero chance. Muhammad took the 365 gods that the people worshipped and threw them all into a well, except for one, the moon god. That's why their symbol is the crescent moon with a star. And there's a book called The Prophet, which you can get on chick.com, CHICK, that deals with that in great detail, the history of Islam. There's another one called Who Is This Allah? A green cover on the book. It's on chick.com as well, CHICK. If you'd like to really study, that's not my field of expertise, but I've read a lot on the topic, and there's zero chance Allah has anything to do with God, the real God of the universe. Okay?
You bet. And sorry, the volume was out for a second there, and so I think that right before mentioning that, if I understood you right, Dr. Hovind, you had mentioned some of these contradictions or challenges from the Quran, and before that you had said, I'm thinking I had heard the last part of it, that if there were a God, it would be a perfect God, and that you were arguing there that the God of Islam doesn't match that.
Correct. The God of Islam, at least the book that they claim they follow, the Quran, has many, many mistakes, errors in it. There's a book called Don Boys, B-O-Y-S, was the Indiana representative for a while. He wrote a book on Islam. He's in Ringgold, Georgia, and the name of his book is I don't remember now, but you can Google Don Boys, B-O-Y-S, and he's got written prolifically on Islam and the serious scientific and historical errors that it has. It cannot be anything to do with God, if God is perfect anyway. That's not the God.
You bet. Thanks for your patience on that volume there. It definitely caught most of it. Just wanted to make sure that it was clear so we didn't kind of cut you out. So we had one question. This is a question about a prior source. So Non Sequitur Show asked, did Kent ever fix his Creationist Handbook, 9th edition, where he claimed one mammoth was carbon dating 2 different dates when it was 2 mammoths found 8 years apart?
It's another question for me. Does Jackson get any questions, or is it all me?
As of now, we don't have any questions for Jackson Wheat.
Well, you said, are there any questions for Jackson Wheat? That's a question for Jackson Wheat, isn't it?
Okay. In my seminar, I cover 18 hours long, rapid fire, about 7,000 slides that I use. And I go through a whole section of things that I had read and collected from various sources about the mammoths. They have picked one from the article Stratigraphy, I forget, I've got the magazine at home, where it can be interpreted, what exactly does this mean? So no, I no longer use that one because it can be interpreted both ways, but they pick on that one and avoid all the other obvious problems with the mammoths. The mammoths are found flash frozen. The food still in their stomach is fresh. It takes 5 days to freeze an elephant at normal, freezing temperatures. Mammoths had to be somewhere around 200 to 300 or 400 below zero, which it never gets that cold on Earth. So I cover on my video 6 the Hovind theory of what happened to the mammoths. And so I did stop using that one quote because of the controversy. I don't think it's been proven wrong. Was it one mammoth, 2 parts of the same mammoth, or 2 separate mammoths side by side? Were they in the same strata? It goes to a much bigger picture, though, of dating anything by what strata it's found in. All over the world, petrified trees are found standing up, running through all these layers, called polystrata fossils. Watch my video number 6 for many pictures of that, examples of trees. So when they tell the students the layers are different ages, that is absolute. They're lying to the students. May not know they're lying, but it is a lie. All the layers, or nearly all of them, would have formed during Noah's flood. So the mammoth quote, I did stop using that because of the controversy, but that does not mean the other 10 or 15 that I use have a problem. Okay?
You got it. Thank you very much. And anybody, if you do happen to have a question for Jackson, we do kind of have a shortage. So we will give those priority if you happen to have them. So in the meantime, the next question we have is, we have Standing for Truth said, there were 3 young married women on the ark who would have repopulated the earth after the flood 4,500 years ago. And he then says, there are 3 major types of human mtDNA in the world. I'm not exactly sure who this is for. Standing for Truth, can you maybe let me know who this is for? Otherwise, I do have a question otherwise for Dr. Hovind that is, well, we do have another one. So this is a question for Jackson. Perfect. Thank you very much. How does Jackson explain the mtDNA map of humanity? So this is the same subject. Then he says, the 3 major halogroups are joined by relatively short line segments, 3 major types of human mtDNA. So Jackson, do you have a response for that one?
It depends on what his definition of short is. I mean, the Native Americans got to North America between 12 and 15,000 years ago. That can not only be determined with mitochondrial haplogroups, that can also be determined by their fossils. You have things like Kennewick Man, who dates to just after the time that they arrived. There are Australians there are the Aborigines in Australia were like they're 65,000 years ago. Several times older than the Earth, I guess, sitting out in space where Australia would eventually be. The mitochondrial DNA, all of the haplogroups point back to Africa because researchers know how haplogroups work and can also calibrate that with fossils and carbon dates of other fossils, like things that you can also cross-check it with other human fossils and human tools that they found outside of Africa, things like that, and then they point back to Africa, so that's not really short. I mean, that's pretty standard technical literature. I'm interested how creationists have a mechanism for explaining that. So,
you got it. All right, we have another question. This is for Dr. Hovind, and this is, does Kent still believe in dinosaurs alive today, like the sauropod in the Congo?
I have interviewed about 100 people face-to-face, most on camera, who claim they have seen a living dinosaur. From the Christian perspective, it's very, very simple. God made everything in 6 days, everything. Before the flood came, the Bible certainly says the people lived to be 900, and there are legends all over the world of what's called a golden age, when man used to live to be nearly 1,000. And it's just a biological fact that reptiles never stop growing. Neither do kangaroos, by the way. But reptiles never stop growing. So in the pre-flood world where they're living to be 900 years old, they would grow to be ginormous. So in the Christian perspective, dinosaurs were big lizards that lived with Adam and Eve. Noah took them on the ark, probably babies, just get babies of everything. Be sure to get a pink one and a blue one. And after the flood, people killed many of them. And there are thousands of legends of people killing dragons. And I cover this in great detail on my video number 3 on drdino.com, how dinosaurs have always lived with man. They're just part of the normal creation. There's ancient artwork that shows dinosaurs on it. And there have been thousands of sightings, like Loch Ness Monster as an example, or the one that washed up on the beach in California. Skin Diver magazine, November 89, ran a big article and had pictures of it. A plesiosaur laying on the beach, just freshly killed by seals. The natives in California watched it fight with the seals a couple days earlier, and the tide just happened to wash it up on the beach south of San Francisco. And I cover all that on video number 3. So my position would be very simple. Dinosaurs have always lived with man under a different name, generally called dragons in most cultures. 1840, they made up a brand new word, dinosaur, 1841. So, of course, that word wasn't used in ancient literature. There was no such word. But today, they would be considered ginormous lizards, reptiles, dinosaur, terrible reptile, terrible lizard. So, yeah, I think dinosaurs have always lived with man. There could be a few still alive. There have been about 20,000 sightings in the last 100 years. Missionary friend of mine was in Congo, Africa for 43 years, ministering to the pygmies in the Congo. And when he showed them pictures of an Apatosaurus, most people know it as the Brontosaurus, like Fred Flintstone drives at work, they said, oh yeah, that's Mokele Mbembe. He lives out in the river. He's not friendly. Don't get close. That was the story. Roy Mackal, University of Chicago, biology professor, wrote the book called Mokele Mbembe, A Living Dinosaur. And I cover dinosaurs still living on my video number 3, which you can watch on drdino.com. So yeah, I believe dinosaurs are part of the normal creation. They did not live before man. They lived with man, and possibly a few are still alive. Okay?
Excellent. Thank you very much. And now we have one last question. So this is for Jackson Wheat, and then we will wrap up. So Jackson Wheat, I just want to read this question to you. And this is from Iron Charioteer. And it is, can you explain symbiosis in the cell and in macroevolution? It's from Iron Charioteer asking, can you explain symbiosis in the cell and in macroevolution?
Well, actually, endosymbiosis is very interesting. So for anyone who doesn't know, endosymbiosis is the process by which a cell took in essentially another cell, and they have learned to coexist with each other. Of course, not consciously, they did it unconsciously. And there's a huge amount of technical literature on this, started by the hypothesis was originally put forward by Lynn Margulis, I think in the 70s or 80s, something like that, and has been extensively demonstrated. I mean, we have to deal with this even in medical sciences. Bactericidal antibiotics affect the mitochondria. Why? Because the mitochondria is a remnant of a bacteria, specifically an alpha proteobacterium, which is similar to the modern rickettsia. They're in the same little group of bacteria. There's been research fairly recently on this group of archaeans, which are more closely related to eukaryotes than to other archaeans. They're called Lokiarchaeota. They're part of this group called the Asgard superphylum, which is found near Greenland, I think. I think it's near Greenland or Iceland, one of those. I'm sorry, I don't quite remember where it is. It's way up there in the cold ocean. And so they have genes like genes for ESCRT and small GTPases, things like that, which helps them to be able to phagocytize helps this one cell would have been able to phagocytize, which means take in this other smaller cell, which was the protomitochondria. And then there's all this research about how the host cell and the mitochondria would have interacted. Nick Lane has a very good book on it titled The Vital Question, where he goes through origin of life stuff. The first cell, Luca, lots of stuff on mitochondria. He's also got lots of literature on mitochondria. Mitochondria have been implicated in the origin of sex because the first organisms were asexual. They didn't need to look for anyone to marry because they were just doing the process all by themselves. Sexuality is hypothesized arose because mitochondria is one of the reasons. It's known, for instance, that recombination repairs damaged DNA. That's one of the reasons. So that could have been or help originate meiosis. And then you can look at various lineages of eukaryotes, and there's this group that was previously called the Archaeozoa. Metamonada is one of them. Diplomonada is another, I think. And they basically have these highly modified mitochondria, and they've modified them into hydrogenosomes and mitosomes, things like that. So there's a plethora of literature on that topic. It's incredibly interesting. I'm so glad that question was asked. Wonderful stuff. As far as macroevolution is concerned, there's an example of, there are lots of examples of symbiosis. I did talk about one. I talked about it with the bee and the flower, and there's technical literature on that and how plants would have dispersed their seeds prior to the origin of Hymenoptera. And there's stuff on Mastotermes darwiniensis, which is the Darwin's termite, which is named after Darwin, Australia, not Charles. And it has a protist in its gut, which is also infected by 2 different species of bacteria. Essentially what happened is you had the termite who was infected by the little protozoan that got into him, and then the bacteria infected the protozoan, and so now they're all living together, and the bacteria, the protozoan, live inside the termite. And so they all lived together, even though we know that obviously the termite was first and then these other things happened. And so endosymbiosis is very interesting. Again, loads of technical literature on it. Go look it up. Go to Google Scholar. Go to Wikipedia. So, yeah. So there's that.
Thank you very much, Jackson Wheat. And thank you very much for tuning in tonight. Want to let you know that the links for each debater will be in the description. So want you to check out their stuff. That's both at Creation Science Evangelism with Dr. Kent Hovind, as well as Jackson Wheat's channel on YouTube. That way, even if you don't agree with the other side, you at least understand it. So encourage you to check out their channels, their websites. And thank you for stopping by. Feel free to hit that subscribe button. Next week, we have Inspiring Philosophy and Pine Creek going head to head on Why Are You a Christian? So thanks for tuning in, and thank you very much for our debaters tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you very much, Kent. I had the volume down.
Oh, yes. Thank you for having me. Be glad to do it again.
You bet. Absolutely. So thank you very much. And for those of you watching, thanks for tuning in. Keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable. Have a good night.